Welcome to our fourth speech for the Taipei Discussion and Learning this spring session. Thomas is going to be giving us a speech tonight titled The Continuing Erosion of Civil Liberties and Freedoms Post 9/11. 9/11 refers to September 11th, 2001, when World Trade Center in the United States was hit by airplanes and fell to the ground. Thomas is going to be giving us a lot of information on what has changed since then. In my introduction, I just wanted to say that I've been back to the United States twice since 9/11, and the place where the changes are most evident is at the airport. I haven't been back since they've had the new body scanners and or voluntary pat-downs. But I do remember going through in 2009 and it being just kind of weird, just at least very different. Signs on the wall said no photography, no loud talking, something like that. It just really felt like don't move, don't smile, don't look at the people who are working there. Just keep moving and be ready to show your documentation, something like that. So, anyway, Thomas, thanks, and let's listen to your speech.
Okay, well, welcome everybody thanks for coming, and welcome to this speech. So, whether you believe 9/11 was a crime committed by a group of radical terrorists or not, as the media and government say, is beside the point. The alarming fact is that since 9/11 there's been a gradual and sometimes even rapid erosion of our civil liberties and personal freedoms in the US and elsewhere as a result of 9/11. Fueled by constant media reports of imminent threats and possible terrorist attacks, we've come to believe that the terrorist threat is a very real one. Yet how real are these threats? And how paranoid should we really be? Recent statistics show that we actually have more chance of being killed by a champagne cork than we do by an actual terrorist. The statistics are between 1980 and 2007 a 1 in 1,300,000 chance of being killed by a terrorist in the United States. However, this statistic hasn't stopped some of the most harmful pieces of anti-constitutional legislation being ushered in since 9/11, that, in my view, have curtailed and impinged on average citizens' human constitutional rights and freedoms, all in the name of keeping us safe. In this speech, we'll be looking at some of these pieces of legislation in more detail and its effects on our civil liberties. These include the Patriot Act, the Homeland Security Act, and certain other acts in the making. So I'd like to start with defining what are civil liberties. Well, civil liberties, as I'll be concentrating on America mainly, civil liberties are the Bill of Rights. And there's a lot of Bill of Rights, but we're going to concentrate on the first one. The first Bill of Rights is to protect the freedom freedom of speech, freedom to assemble and petition the government, freedom of religion. The fourth amendment is the prohibits unreasonable searches and seizures and sets out requirements for search warrants and probable cause. Number 5, due process. Number 6, having a fair and speedy public trial by a jury. And those are the main civil rights we're going to be looking at. But you can just think of them. I think we all innately know what human rights are. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to be not harassed, and those, I guess, would be the main ones in my mind. Okay, so it all started Now, there is a balance between, you know, after 9/11 there's a big explosion and 2 buildings fell down. And there is a balance between security and protecting our security and giving up our liberties. So this is what it's all about. Where do we have a balance? And in this speech I think the balance is all wrong. We're giving up too many freedoms and at the expense of keeping us safe. So here's why I think they're wrong. The first act is the Patriot Act, and that's basically an Orwellian mouthful. It's uniting, strengthening America by providing appropriate tools required to intercept and obstruct terrorism act. It's a 300-page piece of documentation, and there's 2 themes that this act has started. The first is that terrorism, domestic terrorism, has been redefined. Now, it's been redefined and I would say broadened. For example, now a terrorism act includes to break criminal laws. So if I break a criminal law, I could be seen as a terrorist. And it covers all dangerous acts that are in violation of any federal or state law committed to influence government policy. And this expanse seriously affects our First Amendment rights, which are freedom of speech, freedom to assemble, freedom to petition the government. And it also sets a precedent for a new paradigm, according to Ashcroft, is one of the creators of this, where instead of we try people and we find evidence and then we commit them, now the new paradigm is preventing terrorist acts is more important than punishing the crimes after the fact. So there's echoes here of, I don't know if you've seen the Minority Report, it's a movie. It's a 1956 story that shows the world in which the police catch criminals before they can act, based on their thoughts rather than their actions. Or in other Orwellian terms from 1984, this is seen as thought crime. You see. So the second effect this act has had, the Patriot Act, is probable cause has been changed. Section 218 of the Patriot Act amends the FISA and FBI, so the FBI can secretly conduct physical search or wiretaps, primarily to obtain evidence of a crime without providing probable cause of criminal activity. This is a violation of the Fourth Amendment civil right of needing to provide probable cause. Okay, and this sets also a precedent which we're seeing today, and I would argue is being expanded into a future of surveillance of people before there's a probable cause. And this, for me, is one of the most worrying aspects of recent laws, acts, and amendments to laws since 9/11. Okay, so we're going to look at some recent acts. This speech comes at a very good time because there's 2 or 3 recent acts just in the last month that have got big effects. Just in March and in the beginning of the year, have got big effects on the on various civil rights. The first one is the Federal Restricted Buildings and Grounds and Improvement Act of 2011, also known as the Wall Street Protest Bill. Now, this comes after a time of people protesting against Wall Street excesses, the Occupy Wall Street movement. It's an amendment to a bill, it's a change to a bill, where they change the language to, now the language has been changed so that the actor only need behave knowingly which would mean knowing one is in a restricted area would mean you are committing a crime and you can be punishable for up to 10 years imprisonment. So this is basically saying that if there's going to be, for example, some kind of big meeting or some kind of big conference, that you could be in the wrong area at the wrong time and you could be not allowed to be in that area, which is a violation of civil liberties in its first place. And if you are in that area knowingly, who knows what knowingly is, then you can face a jail sentence. So this really impinges on people's, sets a precedent to impinge on people's rights, First Amendment's right to freedom of speech and freedom to petition. In England, we have the same law where the Houses of Parliament, where the government buildings are, you're not allowed to complain or protest outside there. Well, that's where the the decision makers are. So, why not? That's where they make their decisions. Another recent act, 2011, December, on New Year's Eve, while everyone was getting ready for their New Year's Eve celebrations, the National Defense Authorization Act was passed by Obama at the end of last year. It allows the military to indefinitely detain terrorist suspects, including American citizens, arrested in the United States without charge, if suspected or persons are who give support to terrorist or terrorist organisations. So this is a violation of a long-standing laws that go back to the Magna Carta, called habeas corpus, and posse comitatus, which stops the military getting involved in civilian affairs, people affairs. Military historically in England and all in America is not allowed to get involved in civilian affairs. Okay, but now what we're seeing now is an increased militarization of police, and this goes back. You can see cases of more brutality as more arrests happen. I think there's been 6,700 arrests since the Occupy Wall Street movement has been going on, and that's just them usually using their First Amendment rights of free speech to assemble and petition the government. Okay. Naomi Klein is a strong critic who wrote in the Guardian newspaper, the US is sleepwalking into becoming a police state, where like the pre-Magna Carta monarch, the president can lock up anyone. Yes, your worst concerns that this act has formally ended 250 years of democracy in America and driven the state through the heart of the Bill of Rights are really true. Under the new law, almost anyone can be described as a belligerent and have their due process rights revoked, which is the Sixth Amendment Act. Fifth Amendment Act. Okay, and there's actually a war correspondent, Pulitzer Prize winner, who's actually suing the government for this breach of amendment rights. Okay, I think what's most worrying though is in terms of a new way of thinking which the government's adopting is called TAI, Total Information Awareness. It was set up in 2002. What is it? In 2002, the Department of Defense disclosed the most sweeping effort to monitor the activities of Americans since the 1960s. A program called Total Information Awareness. The TIA program aims to revolutionize the ability of the United States to detect, classify, and identify foreign terrorists by developing data mining and profiling technologies that could analyze commercial transactions and private communications. Basically, they're collecting information from people, from your emails, from companies, from your dealings with other companies, from websites you visit. They're retaining that information, and under no probable cause. There's no problem, which is, of course, a Fourth Amendment right to have probable cause. Just 2 weeks ago, the Friday New York Times reports that Attorney General Eric Holder signed off on new guidelines for this Act, the Total Information Awareness Act, where they maintain entire copies of databases that they see fit, both via their own efforts and of other agencies. They data mine those pieces of information, then they retain private information about Americans when there is no suspicion that they are tied to terrorism. Intelligence officials say for up to 5 years. To make matters worse is they're actually building, I read in a newspaper 2 weeks ago, that NSA is building the country's biggest spy center in Ohio, in a desert in Ohio, where they'll be collating all of this information. So this is a kind of a Orwellian nightmare coming into existence, if you ask me. So now we have this. We have two things. We have the fact that terrorism, the word terrorism, is being defined to maybe include domestic terrorism and people, and we have this data miners collection of information. The last act I want to just quickly talk about is the Violation, Radicalisation and Homegrown Terrorism Prevention Act of 2007, which states that ideologically based violence, which means the use of planned use or threatened use of force or violence by a group or individual to promote the group or individual political, religious or social beliefs. Now, this has been criticised for being a prerequisite to data mine, to search, to investigate groups like grassroots campaigns groups, non-violent street protests, a sit-in protest, a grassroots email campaign, because the use of force is quite vague. What is force? What could force mean? And again, force could mean a non-violent street protest. It could mean a sit-in protest that blocks access to business or organisation. It could mean a grassroots campaign to stop Congress with faxes or phone calls. So what is force? We just don't, there's not enough definition. And so you could possibly be tried for maybe spitting on a sidewalk, for immigration offences, for using your First Amendment rights to complain about acts that you're not happy about. Okay, so just give you so the future. What does the future hold? Well, in this area of increased technology, technology is going to be becoming more and more important, more and more integrated into our daily lives. And I read the Department of Defence in the UK predictions 2035, and this is a government document, and this is what they say. They say erosion of civil liberties. Technology will enable pervasive surveillance in response to terrorism, rising transnational crime, and growing capability of groups or individuals to cause catastrophic damage and disruption. The emergence of a so-called surveillance society will increasingly challenge assumptions about privacy, with corresponding impacts on civil liberties and human rights. These capabilities will be deployed by the private as well as the public sector. So it's talking about there being a surveillance society, like everything you know, you're being watched. I mean, in England we already have the biggest amount of CCTV cameras in the world per square kilometre. But this is even going further. And it talks about information and communication technologies, ICT. You may hear that word more often, ICT. It says ICT is likely to be so pervasive that people who are permanently connected to a network or two-way data stream with inherent challenges to civil liberties, being disconnected could be considered suspicious. I mean, it's just, you know, this is worse than Orwellian times. This is worse than 1984. This because they have more control of what you're doing through the possibly in the future. This is what it says, and it goes on to say wearable and implanted wireless ICT devices. Wearable means they're going to put it inside you, or you're going to be able to wear it. Can be accessible to all that can afford it in the second half of the period, probably 2020, and users will be linked through sensors and networks that are enabled by computers that are significantly more capable than the present. So, you know, so the prospect of having all your information, your reliance on technology to hold all your information, and then that information to be monitored, and when that's turned off, and why has he turned that information off? We can't track what he's doing or she's doing. Quite worrying. I'll go on 5 more minutes and then we can have questions. There's obviously internet, issues here. We've got the PEPA and SOPA. I think the government is hell-bent on trying to control the internet, and I think we need to be aware of that and make sure that, you know, the internet is kept open as possible. But they'll always put a reason why you should, you know, you should control it, you see. But is that threat real? I don't think so. And you can look out for new laws trying to be pushed through, like this new law called CISPA. So, as Naomi Wolf says, the future is that possibly the US is moving towards a fascist, technocratic regime from democracy, and that could be replicated in England and other countries elsewhere. So it is quite worrying. Lastly, there's actually laws that if martial law if there's a catastrophic disaster, an emergency disaster, martial law, the new laws put in from the National Security and Homeland Security Presidential Directive give the President overriding constitutional powers. The National Defence Resource Preparedness Act says the President alone has the authority to take over resources in the nation, in labour, food, industry. This was just March the 16th. This wasn't even 2 weeks ago. As long as it is done to promote national defence, which is a phrase so vague it can mean practically anything. So all he has to do is say, well, we need to promote national defence and there's an emergency here, we're going to take your labour, food and industry. That coupled with laws related to executive orders that FEMA have, which are the disaster management people, they have laws that can take over government can take over food resources, mobilise citizens into work brigades, and coupled with the fact that they're making FEMA camps everywhere, it could be seen as a worrying, it's a worrying incident. On one hand you have them saying, well, you should have these preparedness acts in place in case there is a disaster. On the other hand is, are you setting up for a disaster? What's going on here? You know, what? So, in conclusion, according to the Bill of Rights and our innate human rights to freedom of speech, assemble to petition the government, searches prohibits unreasonable searches, warrants and probable cause, the right to fair trials, and a fair and speedy jury and trial have all been violated in some way. It's up to us to be aware of these laws, and because once they're taken away, it's very hard to get them back. So I suggest that you look into this, do a little bit of research, and just tell your friends a little bit. Read the newspaper, and don't get fooled into being fearful, because, like I say, you have more chance of being killed by a champagne cork than a terrorist. And statistically speaking, democide is the biggest killer of civilian populations by far. Since 1900, look up democide, D-E-M-O-C-I-D-E. Look it up. You'll see that over 260 million people since 1900 have died from their own governments. Okay? And then Russia, China, there's many, many more. Alright, so thanks very much for listening, and look forward to hearing your questions.
Thanks, Thomas.